Hello and welcome to episode 17 of series 5 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. Welcome again to the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you're a new listener, you will find over 100 episodes available at our website, which is thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. If you go to the website and you click on the podcast tab, you will see all of the podcast episodes going back all the way to 2020, which you can listen to, consume there. And that's where you'll get the best listening experience, regardless of which platform you're listening on now. On the website, we have links on our show notes. We have a full show note for each episode. And we also have links to our guests and any media that they reference in their interviews itself. Also on the website, you'll find links to our products and our services, our visual communication tools, our explainer videos, and our other internal communications products. So that's the best place to visit if you are new to the show or if you want to get the full podcast experience. Anyway, let's move into the topic for this episode's interview. One of the things I regularly hear when I'm talking to clients is the fact that many of the people within their organizations are experiencing high levels of extra workload and extra expectations placed upon them since we've come out of the pandemic. And this is leading to cases of burnout and disengagement in some cases. And also that then is leading to employee turnover. So I wanted to explore what are some of the causes of burnout and mental health issues within our organizations at the moment, and how much of that is related to the way that we're now working since the pandemic. Many of us are now spending lots of times on video meetings. They're also finding that they're stacking up meetings one after the other. Not only that, but there are many other challenges that we're facing in terms of our workloads and our expectations of our customers and clients with minimal and reduced resources. So we're going to be digging into some of the outcomes of that, some of the challenges that we're facing within organizations, and looking at some of the burnout statistics at the moment within corporate world, corporate America, and corporate UK. But we're also going to be looking into what can we do to resolve that, both on a personal level, what can we do to identify and resolve some of the issues when it comes to burnout, but also what can we do at a corporate level, what can we do to help our colleagues and to be able to develop HR and OD programs that recognize the fact that we're working in a world where burnout is more prevalent and the impact of that is more serious perhaps on our organizations than it has been in the past. So that's what we're going to be exploring in this episode, and it's a very, very positive and upbeat approach that our guest takes to this and will be sharing with us. My guest in this episode is Georgia Homsony. After working for 15 years in corporate America, Georgia left her 9-to-5 jobs to start helping those in the corporate environment. Studies show that only 32% of people are engaged with their jobs, and their mental health has plummeted since the pandemic. Georgia started the Daily Dose to provide resources for employees to help prevent burnout and also to increase engagement. So, hello, Georgia. How are you?
Hello, Craig. Doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. And just for our listeners' benefit, because we have listeners all over the world, whereabouts are you in the world? Position us for where you're sort of sitting or standing at the moment, Georgia.
Yes, I am in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Fantastic. And what's the weather like in North Carolina today? Is it hot?
It is. It is. The humidity is kicking up. So it's high 70s, but it feels in the 80s.
Very good, very good, very good. Excellent. Well, I gave a very, very, very brief introduction to your kind of career there, Georgia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where those 15 years in corporate America were spent, and then maybe a little bit about this kind of transition that you've undertaken? I'm not sure how long ago. How long ago was it you've started out with a Daily Dose and all the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I started Daily Dose 4 years ago. We just
Okay.
celebrated our 4-year anniversary. So prior to that, when I graduated school, I started off my background is in marketing. So I started off working for a few different ad agencies in New York City. And then I moved to San Diego for a bit just to do something different and went internally to an agency there and had more exposure to different elements of marketing. And then eventually I went in-house and worked for a few startup companies. and then spent the bulk of my career doing brand management for a beverage importer.
Mhm.
So, a lot of different industries I've been exposed to and a lot of different facets of marketing. And I had personally reached a point of burnout with my last job that I really thought I would be at the rest of my career.
Yeah.
So that was, it took me a couple years to actually leave because I think we can get attached and we feel loyal if we like our boss or like the mission of the company. And I had finally reached my breaking point and decided to leave, but actually didn't know what I wanted to do next.
Mm. Mm.
And so at that point, I decided to go live abroad because that was my one regret in life was never
Yeah.
studying abroad in college. So I decided to go live abroad and try and figure out what my next step was in my career. And while I was over there, I was with some other entrepreneurs that had said, "Oh, you should start a business." But in my head, my brain was so focused on marketing that I just didn't really have a desire to start a marketing agency.
Mm.
And then my trip was cut short. And when I came back to the US, wellness was really the only thing that I had felt passionate about. And I had been working with a yoga instructor as a side project to try and bring retreats to the corporate setting.
Mm.
And so I was kind of working on this on the side while I was figuring out what my next step was marketing wise. And then it just kind of dawned on me, well, what if I take this
Hmm.
side passion project and try and make this my full-time thing?
Mm. Mm.
And I don't think it had ever dawned on me that that was an option because, you know, I'm Gen X, millennial, right on the
Mm.
border. And I just feel like my mentality was you go to college for a certain degree and then that's what you do.
Yeah.
And I think these days there's a lot more flexibility. I think there's a lot of people that are maybe changing careers later in life, but I never even really thought of that as an option because I was so focused on marketing. And if I started my own business, that's what I would have to do because that's
Yeah.
where my experience was. So, I personally dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome when I started Daily Dose because even though I was passionate about the mission and what I was teaching, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, why are companies going to hire me? I'm not a psychologist or a
Yeah.
doctor. Why would someone listen to what I have to say on wellness? So there was a lot of mindset work that has been done in the last 4 years to get me to where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a great story. And I think a lot of, when you look at the kind of the genesis of a lot of businesses, it's born out of a personal experience or something that people have been passionate about. And I totally, relate to what you were saying there about, kind of almost typecasting yourself into your career role. And I think that will probably resonate with a lot of people who think, they've kind of, particularly when they've spent a lot of time working in a particular field, is could I ever break out of this and do something different? And I think yours is a great example of that. You're only kind of maybe constrained by your own thinking a lot of the time. So that's a really,
Mhm.
really great story. Just as a matter of interest, where did you go? You said you went abroad. Whereabouts where did you go to?
Yeah, so I traveled with a company called Remote Year,
Mm.
and their model is it's built for people that are able to work remotely. So the idea is you keep your job and then they set you up with an apartment and a co-work space
Oh, wow.
and you live in a different country each month.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had signed up for a 4-month program and our first month was in Lisbon in
Mhm.
Portugal,
Yeah.
and then we went to Valencia, Spain,
Mm.
and then to Cape Town, South Africa.
Wow.
And then I was really excited for our next destination, which was Croatia, but that unfortunately was canceled because that was right when the pandemic had hit.
Oh, what a shame. Oh, wow. But
But I will
what
be
an
going
amazing
this
thing.
year, so
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
making up for it.
Well, I'd never. I'm probably. I don't know. It's probably I'm not their target market, but that's. I've never heard of that. Oh, a brilliant idea. I'm gonna have a look
It
at that
is
up. I'm gonna look
brilliant.
at that. Yeah, yeah. What a
Yeah.
fantastic thing to do. Well, anyway, sorry, I digress. So anyway, let's get back to let's get back to burnout and mental health. And actually, we're not off going off track because I would imagine that was pretty good for you for your mental health.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit more about this, about burnout and mental health, because that's your kind of passion. That's what you're working on at the moment. I mean, what's the kind of current state of play? I know we talked about a little bit of data there in the at the outset, which is around the kind of 32% of people engaged, and I guess that comes from a lot of, there's a lot of those surveys like Gallup that kind of sort of every time they do them, that seems to sort of stay fairly static.
Right.
What else is going on in this space at the minute, Georgia, that listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean,
Mm,
it's not good. I'll just say that.
mm,
We're seeing close to 80% of people that are saying that they feel stressed or burnt out at work. So, I mean, that number is staggering. I've seen that 40% of people are actually contemplating leaving their job because
mm,
of feeling burnt out. And the scary thing about that for a business owner should be the cost that it takes to replace that person. So when people walk out the door, it can cost 20% of their salary to fill that role.
yeah.
When you're factoring in recruitment costs, onboarding costs to train a new person, and then the loss in productivity in that gap of when that person leaves to when they hire someone new. And not to mention goodwill, right? Because what happens to other employees when you hear someone left? Then you start kind of questioning your own role. Well, are things bad? Should I leave? And it almost sends people into a panic
Mm,
when
mm,
people start leaving a company, I think.
mm,
So yeah, so not a lot of good numbers. We're also seeing just increases across the board on mental health issues going on. Um, Half of people will experience a mental health issue in their lifetime.
mm,
And there's so many out there, but the big one that I feel like a lot of people are struggling with right now is anxiety,
mm,
especially with when the pandemic happened, we pretty much were isolated. And I think now having to re-enter social settings even, is giving people social anxiety
mm, mm,
or needing to go back into a workplace after they've gotten comfortable with a remote lifestyle.
mm,
So there's a lot of things that the pandemic almost exacerbated when it comes to mental health issues.
mm, mm,
We're seeing 42% of people are having more trouble sleeping than before. There's 33% more reported alcohol and substance abuse. So I think now if people can't deal, they just want that quick fix to help
mm,
themselves feel better.
mm,
So,
mm,
yeah, so unfortunately, the numbers are just showing that we're going in this direction where even more people are going to be struggling with these mental health issues.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, I agree, and I have the privilege of like you, working for myself. So I get to see a lot of inside a lot of organizations. I get to stick my head through the hatch and then kind of withdraw it and go somewhere else. And you do see a lot of these kind of common patterns that obviously when people are in those organizations, maybe they're not as aware, but you see a lot of people who are just and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, Georgia, around, and I think you said a lot of anxiety related to the pandemic, but also a lot of the kind of burnout issues, not only due to kind of maybe reduced staffing levels, but just the kind of intensity of work at the moment in the kind of teams world where people are just endlessly back to back, day to day, no break between meetings, just stacking up one thing after another, and particularly video calls, which I find really exhausting. A day of
Yep.
video calls for me is far more tiring than a day of what I seem to remember a day of face to face meetings felt like. I mean, how much
Right.
of that is due to the kind of like post pandemic working kind of world and the fallout from that, but also the kind of the way that we're working now from your perspective, Georgia?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people are feeling that fatigue from being on the computer. I also feel like what happened to just regular phone calls.
Yeah.
Why do
Yeah.
we need to be on video staring
Yeah.
at each other?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I understand it for certain team meetings and you want to, interact a bit more and still have that team building environment if you are a fully remote company. But I don't think that every meeting needs to be a video call.
No.
I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, can you just call me on the phone like a regular phone call?
Yeah, I'm the
Because,
same.
yeah,
I just find it I totally agree. I mean, I run some workshops for my clients, where we help them to kind of, think about some of the challenging conversations they need to have with their colleagues on a day-to-day basis. And I kind of do a bit of a sort of, what's good and bad about all these different ways that where we can have those conversations. Obviously face to face is a kind of primary way we would think about, but then we talk about video calls and when I talk about phone, it's like it still exists. You still can
right.
make a voice phone
Like
call. You
I've been
don't have to video people,
right.
or text them. It's like we've kind of skipped. If it's not instant messenger, it has to be a video call, and we've kind of forgotten that there is this really old technology, which is just audio. Which, yeah, I agree.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's just less intrusive. I mean, like we're recording
yeah.
this video, recording this we're recording this audio purely by audio. And I do that because, I find it's an audio podcast and people are more natural when you just not, I mean, kind of look at
Y-
each other and stare at each other for 45 minutes or so. So yeah,
I
yeah.
completely agree. And I appreciate it because I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of them are on video and you're just
Yeah.
staring at yourself or the person and
Oh,
then
yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
oh, how do I look
Yeah.
today? And oh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think
Yeah.
it allows us to focus more on the
The
conversation when it
quality of the
comes in.
conversation. I agree. I agree. And
Yes.
we can do the things we do if we were meeting face to face, like kind of look out the window at this, the sky while I'm talking to you. And it doesn't feel like I'm kind of ignoring you. If, we were on a video call, you'd be thinking, why is he looking away from me? Or, have I
Right.
said something wrong? But anyway, we digress because we both obviously sort of agree with that.
Yeah.
What do we, when we talk about burnout, let's just kind of make sure that we're on the kind of same page with that. I mean, I guess there's the kind of real kind of far, the kind of maximum burnout, which is where you just fall apart and you can't cope anymore. But I mean, what are some of the maybe, the kind of the lower level signs of burnout, and what does that look and feel like? And, and again, without prying into your own personal past, you said at the beginning, and I think we've all felt burnout, but obviously, to varying degrees. What do we mean by burnout, and what's driving that sort of sense of burnout, do you think?
Yeah.
Mm,
And, when I do speaking events, Craig, I like to start the conversation by identifying what is burnout and what it isn't,
mm,
because I think this word gets thrown around a lot where people would be like, oh, I'm so burnt out today.
mm,
And burnout, it's not having a stressful day or a bad day, it
mm,
is a chronic condition.
mm,
So, this is something that doesn't happen in a day. You don't get you might say, "Oh, I feel burned out today," but you're probably just stressed or overworked that
mm,
day.
mm.
But burnout is something that would happen over a longer period of time.
Okay.
And the other misconception I think people have is that it just means that you work long hours.
Mm,
And I like to tell people, I used to work 10, 12-hour days by choice. And I loved my job and I felt very fulfilled. And I actually did not feel burned out
mm,
working those long hours. Now, when I reached a point of burnout, it was because I felt like I wasn't getting the support I needed from management. And there were certain processes and cultures and the culture in place I didn't feel like was compatible with where I was at in my career anymore.
mm,
So there's so many issues that go into it that are beyond just working long hours. And I think that someone could work a 9 to 5 typical 8-hour day, but they might still be feeling burnout if, let's say, no one says hello to them in a given day.
mm,
And if it's a receptionist and people just walk by and ignore them, they
mm,
might be feeling burnout because they don't feel like they're really a part of the organization.
mm,
So
mm,
there's all these different factors. And so the definition, I'll just read it to you, that I love to use is
mm,
burnout results when deadlines, demands, working hours, and other stressors supersede rewards, recognition, and relaxation.
Mm.
So it's not only working long hours, but do you have certain deadlines that are stressing you out that are constantly something that you feel like you can't meet, that
Mm.
your manager or your clients are putting on you?
Mm.
Um, are there other things going on at home that are maybe affecting your work life that are adding to that? So, pretty much, if those stressors are superseding what you're getting in return.
Yeah.
So, not only your work life balance, but recognition is another big thing.
Mm.
So, are you being recognized for the work you're doing? Do you understand how it's impacting the company and you feel like you're part of this community where you're actually contributing? So, it's a lot of different factors.
Mm.
So, if people are feeling that way, it's really important to try and break down where the root of the problem is.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, well, that's a nice segue into what I was going to talk to you about next, then, Georgia, which is I know your approach is a business to B2B approach, so you're working with organizations. You may be working with individuals within those organizations, but you're working at a kind of corporate level. And what I'd like to do is maybe just think about maybe starting on an individual level. So when you're working with individuals who are experiencing burnout or what they perceive to be burnout, or and mental health issues, I'd just like to get some ideas for you there. And I guess there's, thinking about some of our listeners listening to this are probably, this that they may be experiencing that themselves, and likelihood they have, or in the past at least. So what are some of the tips? I know it's kind of difficult to summarize, which is a very broad area, and without
Mhm.
knowing the kind of context that they may be in. But so maybe some more kind of generic thoughts around firstly identifying that I'm maybe on the edge of burnout, and also what can I do to maybe either better understand what's causing that burnout, and or kind of fix that, or start to address it, or start to make some inroads into it,
Right.
Georgia.
Sure. So the first thing I tell people to do is a daily check-in.
Mm.
So you might ask yourself, how am I feeling? Red, yellow, or green?
Mm.
And obviously, red is you feel on fire, that you're
Mm.
at your breaking point, and green is great, and then yellow somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So if people are feeling red most days of the week, you're probably approaching burnout.
Mm.
Now, if you're mostly red and yellow, you still want to pay attention to that.
Mm.
So, you really want to live in the green yellow phase. Every day is not going to be green,
Mm.
obviously. We're going to
Mm.
have stressful days. But let's say you're tracking how you're feeling, red, yellow, or green, for a month, and once a week you have a red. There's nothing to be alarmed about, because I think we automatically think that stress is bad,
Mm.
but stress actually has a lot of benefits, and we are built to be equipped to deal with stress.
Mm.
So there's no one in this world that has zero stress. So I think even just understanding that, and when a stressful time comes up, if you just remind yourself, okay, this is a stressful moment in time, but I
Mm.
can get past this and this feeling will go away.
Mm.
And you
Mm.
just kind of let yourself work through that, and then it doesn't feel as heavy. So I think just starting to pay attention to how you're feeling, because without that awareness, that's the first step in
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
right? So we don't know what's going on until we even take a step back and know how we're feeling. So I always tell people, do a daily check-in, even if you have to plug a reminder in your phone or have a post-it note maybe on the mirror in your bathroom saying, how am I feeling today?
Yeah.
And you could check in at the end of the day. Was
Yeah.
it a red
Y-
day, a yellow day, or a green day? So that's kind of the first thing. Now, if you start to see, 2 to 3 days a week that are red repeatedly, like you
Mm.
might have a stressed out week because let's say you're working on a deadline for
Yeah.
something. Okay, once again, that's a normal stressor that is going to come and go, and that's okay. We're meant to handle stress that way. But if you're having 2, 3 red days every week for a month, then we want to start to dive into what's causing this. So, is it something going on in the workplace? Maybe there's been a change in management, or your boss is acting different towards you. It might be something at home. Maybe nothing feels different, but if you dive deeper in, you start to realize, hey, I haven't been sleeping as many hours each night. And this is
Mm,
kind of affecting my mood and how I'm acting in the workplace. So there's so many different factors, but I think if you can start to isolate when you're having those feelings of anxiousness or stress or
mm,
anything that is coming up for you, take a moment and just think, okay, what is causing this and dive deeper
mm.
and then try to track those trends over, let's say, a month of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it the same thing that's going on that is contributing? Because once you can identify the stressors, then you could start to work on them.
So that's like looking for patterns. Is there any kind of
Exactly.
correlation, and then starting to maybe think about what's behind that? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then once you identify those stressors, I tell people ask for help or have conversations, which seems obvious, but a lot of us don't want to do it. We'll say, oh, well, everyone's busy. I don't want to ask my boss for help, or I don't want to ask a coworker for help. But the alternative is if you keep pushing yourself and having a breakdown, that's going to be worse for your team and the company in the long run.
Yeah.
So, I always encourage people talk to your manager so that they're aware of what's going on. If it's a stressor at home, ask your partner to take some of the load off or try to delegate. I mean, if there's something that is taking up a lot of your time, consider things like, can you hire a virtual assistant? A virtual
Yeah.
assistant's 15 hours, $15 an hour, and if that frees up, 5 hours a week for you, that might be worth the cost of you having a mental breakdown, I would hope.
That'd be the
So,
tipping point. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, just kind of looking at all the other alternatives. I think a lot of times we overcommit and people think, well, I can't not show up for my
Mm,
weekly networking meeting, or, I have to be the driver to drive my kids to 10 different activities a week. I mean, start to actually take a deeper dive into that. Do
mm,
your kids need to participate in 10 things a week? Could you
mm,
try asking another parent to carpool, and maybe that would lighten your load and you take turns?
mm.
Can you not be part of 5 networking groups? Maybe you dial that back to 3, or you start saying no to some social events so you can have a night at home by yourself to recharge. So just kind of really breaking it down. I think a lot of times we just think we have to do all these commitments.
Yeah, and I guess a lot I like a bit similar to your story earlier when you were kind of, you were kind of trying to work out where you were going and what you wanted to do, and after you kind of, you kind of you're walking away from your job and thinking about, "Well, I have to go back into marketing." Sometimes it takes other people to ask the questions that you can't ask yourself, or you sometimes you just can't see the wood for the trees, and you need someone to kind of say to you, well, why are you part of 5 working networks? Well, working networking groups. Why are you not using a personal assistant to do some of this mundane stuff that you're overqualified for anyway, and would break. Sometimes I think it's really important to recognize that having connections and people we can talk to, whether it's a professional like yourself or just someone we can trust, and it's usually our partners who kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting on that, and they're
Mhm.
often part of they're in amongst the same sort of burnout situations as us maybe, so it's not fair on them. So yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, about kind of sharing those issues and having a kind of a confidant who you could speak to?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person.
Mm.
I am a sharer, so I have no problem
Yeah,
reaching out to
it's a
people,
good point.
but I think a lot of people, especially men, I think, a lot of them were brought up to think, well, that's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And,
Mm.
I need to be the rock in the family or the breadwinner or, the leader in the organization.
Mm.
And I think we need to break the stigma that asking for help is a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a sign of strength because, we're being vulnerable, but we're also being human,
Mm.
right? And
Absolutely.
that's when we give people the chance to connect with us, is when, if your manager says, hey, I need help with this. I mean, how do you feel? Because I know in the past, when a manager comes up to me or the CEO walks into my office and says, I really need your help with something. I mean,
Mm.
that makes me so excited that I feel needed and
Yeah.
that I can contribute to someone that's in this position that's even, higher up than me.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of stigma around it and misconception. But, for someone that does feel uncomfortable with asking for help, not everyone has to know that you're asking for help.
Mm.
So if you decide to go see a therapist, you don't have to tell anyone.
Mm.
You can tell someone in your own time, or asking a coworker. No one has, your boss doesn't have to know that you're asking for help if you don't want
Mm.
them to.
Mm.
So just kind of take a step and do what feels comfortable for you. And I guarantee that if you take that first step, you'll realize, okay, this isn't so bad. And a lot of it is just in our own heads.
Yeah.
So no
Yeah.
one on the outside is looking at you thinking, wow, they're really weak that they asked for my help on this project.
Mm.
But it's
Mm.
more of our own. And that's what inspired me to write my book, Craig.
Mm.
So I don't even think we've talked about that yet. But
No, yeah, we're definitely gonna talk about that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but pretty much it's all about reframing your thoughts, because a lot of times it's really just what's going on in our own head. And if we could reframe some of that negative talk into a positive, like, oh, instead of saying it makes me weak to ask for help, saying it makes me strong to ask for help.
Mm.
And if you could start to say it over and over, you actually trick your brain into whatever it is that you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
But we really need to change the narrative of what we've been conditioned to think.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. No, we're definitely gonna cover the book because that's a really important part of this. Just before we do that, though, Georgia, just another quick question, kind of leading on from that. So, a lot of the people who are listening to this show will be, I know all of that stuff that we just talked about will be relevant to them personally, from a professional perspective, thinking about their role as corporate HR or corporate organizational development or corporate comms. What are some of the elements of what you've talked about there that they can kind of scale up? So rather than just doing that for everybody in their organization on an individual level, what are some of the things that they can maybe do in terms of thinking about how they train, how they communicate, how they reward people, how they design people's workloads, that can kind of build in some of those issues around burnout and mental health that you just talked about there, Georgia?
Yeah. So, a couple ideas around this. In regards to communication, I think we need to remember that this isn't a one time thing.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, so I obviously work in the wellness space. So when I talk to HR managers and I ask them, okay, do you have a wellness program? Yes. Has it been communicated? Yes. We let them know when we onboard them. So
Yeah.
that would be one example. Okay, fine. But if you have an employee that's been at the company 5, 10 years, they're not going to remember
No.
something that you told them once when you onboarded. So are you communicating the resources that you have available ongoing? Furthermore, is your leadership leading by example? I mean, there's so many times I run a webinar and the CEO or the managers are not on the webinar. So, what does that say to your employees?
Yeah.
It's not a priority. And there's so many people I talk to that say, well, I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want my boss to think I'm a slacker because I'm taking a half hour lunch or listening in on this webinar. And so I think that really leadership has to um, participate in whatever resources you're investing in, so that they're actually showing that it's a priority for the company. And I think that's when it actually starts to become part of the culture, because anyone can say, okay, this is our culture and these are our values. But if they're not being acted out, people pick on that really quickly.
Yeah.
So I would say leading by example, communicating. So many people I ask, oh, does your company have a wellness program? And they don't even know the answer. They don't
Mm.
even know if they do.
Mm.
So even though HR might think that they're communicating, and I'm not putting this all on
Mm.
HR. I think
Mm.
they have so much on their plate. It needs to
Yeah.
come from multiple angles. Like each manager? Are they encouraging their team? Are they showing up for things? But over communicating, because I don't think you can over communicate it when it comes to mental health resources.
Mm,
The other thing I try to encourage people to do, or companies to do, is think about both proactive resources and reactive resources.
mm,
So a lot of times companies will say, oh, well, yeah, we have health insurance or we have an employee assistance EAP program. And those are great, but to me, those are more reactive.
mm,
Somebody reaches out if they're having a breakdown or if they're sick and then they go to the doctor. What we try to focus on at Daily Dose is more proactive resources. And both are important. So I'm not saying pick one or the other,
mm,
but if you can afford to do both, and you can do that in a low cost way. And I'm happy to talk with companies about what that looks like. But for us, we try to schedule breaks in the workday and educate them on things like nutrition and financial wellness, mental health, so that they don't reach that point of burnout or
mm,
a breakdown.
mm.
So
Very
we
good.
try to do more proactive and encourage them to take breaks in the workday.
Mm,
Um, Another thing that I think could be considered part of wellness that doesn't cost anything is to do no meeting days. So
mm,
some companies will do no meeting Mondays or no meeting Fridays. And I love that idea because how many of us in corporate feel like our entire calendar is booked up
mm,
and we're just in meetings all day?
mm.
And then when that happens, we don't have time to do our actual work, which is
Yeah,
exactly how I felt when I worked my last job. I was like, I'm in meetings talking to people all day. And half of those meetings, Craig, I don't even think I needed to be at,
yeah.
mind you.
Very frustrating.
So I think having no meeting designated days, having wellness days or wellness hours, so you can schedule a daily dose webinar, for example.
Very
But
good.
but
Mhm.
during that time, block it off on the company calendar so it's clear that this is a priority. And even if you're not attending the webinar, that's your time to go take a lunch or go for a walk. Because too often companies are making it optional where you could have another meeting scheduled at the time of a wellness program. And then once again, it's really showing that it's not that big of a priority to
Mm.
the company.
Mm, very good. No, I agree with everything you've said there. And particularly around the kind of walking the talk piece, and also the the kind of giving people it's okay not to be in a meeting days is, I think, is a really, really
Yeah.
great
Well,
call.
and even looking at, can we scale back the number of meetings we're having?
Mm,
Does everybody need to be in a meeting? Does the meeting need to be at the same frequency that it's at? I
yeah.
mean, there's so many, if in corporate, it's just, the weekly status meeting or, this team meeting. And I'm not saying that's not valuable because a lot of them are, but take a look and actually think, does this need to be a meeting? Does it have to be in person? Does everybody that's there need to be there? Or could you have one person from each team representing and then
Mm,
reporting back to the group? That way we're giving people back their time.
mm,
I'm
very good.
I feel like that's got to be one of the biggest complaints in corporate is
Yeah.
that there's just too many meetings and people are over it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, let's talk about the book then. So, tell us a little bit more about the book and kind of linking it to what we've been talking about, please, Georgia.
Yeah, so I just published a book this year on self-talk. It's called You're Not Lazy: Change Your Words to Change Your Worth. And it was really inspired by so many people talking down about themselves and putting extra pressure on themselves. And it just made me want to write this message to say, why are we putting all this pressure on ourselves? And so the book dives into why we are the way we are, which a lot of it is societal norms and how we were brought up as children. And then it moves into how we can start to change this behavior so that we can have better confidence, less stress, and just feel good about ourselves without putting all these added pressures on
Mm,
ourselves.
excellent. And when you said you published it this year, whenabouts did you publish that, Georgia?
February and 2024 for anyone
Yeah.
who's listening to
Okay.
this in the future.
Yeah. Fantastic. And that sounds brilliant. So let's get some links to that into the show notes. Where is that available from? All kind of retail places, Amazon, or is it from?
It is available on Amazon, and it's also available on my website, which is georgiahomsany.com.
Okay, well, we'll put those links into the show notes. So if you're listening to the show on iTunes, or if you're listening to it on a different platform, Spotify, sometimes our show notes do appear. But if you're looking for those links, if you go across to engagingic.com, you'll find the link there in the podcast list. You'll find this episode, and you can then download or find the link to the show notes, and that will take you straight to George's website, and also to the link on Amazon where you can purchase a copy of the book. So, well, that's fantastic, George. I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. I found that a really helpful conversation. I think it's one of those topics that, regardless of what you're dealing with, in terms of your corporate agenda, whether that includes mental health and burnout, I think we all relate to it as whatever we're doing, whether we work for ourselves or whether we work for a big corporate. I think we all recognize and identify with some of the things you've talked about there on a personal level anyway. So I think it's one of those topics that has that kind of universal usefulness to any listener, regardless of where they're working. So I'm really grateful for that, Georgia. What are you up to for the next few months? Have you got anything exciting on the cards?
I actually just filmed a TV show. It's a boot camp for entrepreneurs that will
Ah,
be coming out soon, and it's called The Blocks. So that's my latest venture. Other than traveling, of course, I'll be
okay.
heading back to Europe this summer.
Okay, so
But
where's the TV program going to be screened? Is that just in the States, or is it going? Is it? Yeah.
it'll be on Amazon Prime.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you must send me the link for that when it's.
I will.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, follow me on social media and you can get all of those updates. So it's on Instagram, it's just my name, Georgia Homsany. And then I live on LinkedIn. So I love when people connect with me on LinkedIn, and would love to hear any of your feedback on our episode and any other counter theories, etc. Because I think this is such a broad topic. And I always tell people you don't need to agree with everything you hear, but certain things are going to resonate with people,
yeah,
and that's what you follow. All that
yeah.
matters is that it speaks to you, and then you want to take action.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's absolutely brilliant, Georgia. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us, and I'm really grateful. And yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with this show and getting a copy of your book. So I'm really grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, listeners.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.